And the last time I checked, there were about 215,000 views. So congrats, Maxime. Today, he will talk about tackling climate change for inclusive and sustainable growth. Maxime, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. You have 45 minutes for your lecture. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Carlos. Can you hear me well?
We can.
All right. So let me share my presentation. And in fact, yes, it is going to be based on what I presented in Analytical Corner during the spring meetings. I have just 45 minutes to give a very broad overview of the climate change challenge that we are facing and the policies that we need to tackle this challenge and opportunities that it actually presents. So let me start from a general statement. Our overarching objective is inclusive and sustainable growth. And inclusive means, in simple words, means broad-based, that is life improvement or prosperity for everyone, including, in particular, elimination of poverty, or providing at least basic access for everyone to basic economic goods and services like food, water, education services, health services, financial services. And then we want it to be sustainable. We want this prosperity, this life improvement to be sustained over time, not to decline over time. And that means preserving our wealth, preserving our factors of production, human capital, produced capital like roads, infrastructure, but also importantly, critical components of natural capital. And again, like clean water, clean air, biodiversity, forests, and stable climate. The bad news is that at present, our economic growth of the last several decades, it is not sustainable. And it's actually hardly inclusive in a sense. To be fair, we've achieved significant progress at the global scale. Over the last decade, we have been eliminating poverty. The poverty has been reduced, and life expectancy has increased by over a decade. But we still have large inequalities between countries, within countries, often growing. We still have a lot of extreme poverty, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And moreover, this economic growth has left a sizable ecological footprint. We alter the chemical composition of global ocean, global water, global atmosphere. We reduce wildlife populations at alarming rates. And more scientists are ringing the alarm that we are close to irreversible disruption in key planetary systems, key planetary ecosystems that have been the cornerstone of or enabled the development of our civilization for thousands of years. And the climate is one of the disrupted systems. Because of greenhouse gases that we are adding into atmosphere, the temperatures, the global temperatures are already warmer by 1 degree Celsius compared to 100 years ago. And warming causes sea level rise, increase in magnitude and frequency of natural extreme events, natural disasters. And eventually, if it continues, we are running into risk of really large catastrophic changes to our environment, which would threaten habitability of our planet. So we need a steadfast and comprehensive climate action. And it's not going to be easy. It requires global cooperation. It requires addressing multiple market failures. And it has become a bit more complicated because of current COVID-19 pandemic, which is devastating us, devastating our economies. It's claiming millions of lives. And it is important to build back better after this pandemic. But we see enormous progress in technologies, in climate solutions. We see immense benefits of climate action. Climate action provides us not only with opportunity to be sustainable in the future, it also provides new sources of growth, new opportunities for jobs and investment. And it also offers many opportunities to make our societies more inclusive, and it provides many other environmental co-benefits like clean air and fresh water. So let me go through the climate change challenge in a bit more detail, and then let us look at the policies and the climate action that we need and opportunities that it offers.
Maxime, can I just interrupt for one second?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to inform our people in the attendance, everyone, that this lecture is also being streamed live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So thanks, Maxime. Please proceed. Sorry to disturb you.
I guess I will have even more views now.
Thanks again.
All right. So what is climate change? Two effects. We have natural greenhouse effects. Some green gases in the atmosphere, greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, water vapor, nitrous oxide, and others are able to trap radiation reflected from planet into the space, and that means they keep atmosphere warmer. That's natural, and the other component is that there is unprecedented greenhouse gas emissions in the last decades, in the last basically 5 decades. It's much larger than what we've observed, so much so that the concentration of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere right now is much larger than what we have observed in more than 1 million years. As a result, the planet is warming. The temperature, as I've mentioned already, has changed already by over 1 degree Celsius globally, more in some regions, less in other regions. And if we continue our emissions at the current trends, a case of a so-called business as usual scenario, the projected warming is going to be more, about 4 to 6 degrees Celsius until 2100, until the end of century. And that is, again, unprecedented increase, likely unseen in millions of years. So this is a big deal for the planet. And while warming itself has many disruptive effects on our life, it's not only about warming. We also get larger variability of weather, larger variability of temperatures, leading to cold spells or to heat waves. Also larger variability of precipitation, leading to dry spells or extreme rainfall. This variability eventually leads to larger frequency and magnitude of natural extreme events, hurricanes, tropical hurricanes, typhoons, tropical cyclones, floods, droughts, forest fires. We expect sea level to rise for about 1.2 meters by 2100. The glaciers are retreating at the polar regions, but also in the mountains, including iconic glaciers in Kilimanjaro, for example. The water in the ocean becomes more acidic as the ocean absorbs more of carbon dioxide, and that threatens many marine species, especially coral reefs. We are losing biodiversity as many species do not have time to adapt to this rapid climate change. And some species do adapt, but with dire consequences like spread of pests and viruses. And an example For example, the locust spread in Western Africa, Eastern Africa, which can be linked again to changing climate and increased frequency of natural disasters. The effect of warming is highly nonlinear. There's a big difference between warming of 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees in terms of number of heat waves, number of extreme events, for example. But if we go further, we are entering a really dangerous territory of rising risk of global cascade of catastrophic, irreversible changes that can alter our global ecosystems. For example, fast meltdown of polar ice sheets, which can raise sea level not by 1 meter but by several meters. That would be a major major event which will affect lives of billions of people and so on. So it is very important to avoid these risks. Now, even disregarding these tail risks, we have historical evidence saying that weather shocks do negatively affect the economy. We have micro studies saying that labor productivity is being negatively affected if temperatures go higher than some thresholds like 30 degrees Celsius. We have evidence that crop yields also can drop significantly after after temperatures get significantly warmer. Again, for example, for maize, it's around 30 degrees Celsius. Health is affected by heat waves. The rainfall variation affects water supply, affects energy production, especially if it's hydro energy. So much so that some studies project for sub-Saharan Africa project GDP per capita almost 50% lower by mid-century than what should have been with current temperatures. So there's a big drag on economic growth. And then on top of that come natural disasters, and the losses from natural disasters are sizable and macroeconomically significant, and that is the case in all countries, advanced economies, emerging markets, low-income countries, but more so in low-income countries, especially relative to their economies. So natural disasters claim lives, thousands of lives every year, and billions of damages every year, and that is and the averages are dominated by large outliers, which have much larger aggregate effect on the economy. And again, no country is spared from natural disasters, but but the types, the exposure is of course different. And in sub-Saharan Africa, it's probably droughts is one of the most important ones. Also together with floods and tropical cyclones. And again, in addition to that, climate change is not the only environmental issue which we are facing. There are other issues. For example, deforestation is still going on around the world, and especially in primary forests, which are carbon sinks, and they are sources, and they are storing large stocks of biodiversity. And as we can see on the graph, Africa is still in possession in large swaths of primary forests, large, very biodiversity rich region, but that's the green areas on the map. But then the red areas are the areas where the deforestation has been happening in the last 20 years. And as you can see, it is happening in many countries. So we link to that, we have loss of wildlife and fisheries due to unsustainable harvesting methods, and we have chemical pollution, especially by plastic, land and water degradation. Desertification is especially important in the Sahel region, for example, also due to excessive nitrogen and phosphorus loading due to use of chemical fertilizer in agriculture. And we have, again, reduced access to clean air and water, again, due to chemical pollution, climate change, unsustainable use of water. For example, air pollution on average takes away about 2-3 years of average life in the world. So it's an important issue. And all these issues, one way or another, they are linked to climate change, and they are caused by similar market failures. So there are synergies across the policies that we need to address these issues. And just an example, deforestation is deforestation leads to exacerbate climate change since forests are absorbing carbon. So if there are less of them, they absorb less of carbon. So it leads to climate change, but at the same time, it also leads to wildlife habitat loss. That means loss of biodiversity. And at the same time, wildlife habitat loss leads to a larger propensity of wildlife to transmit viruses between each other and to cattle or to even humans. So as I see that these issues are very much linked to each other. And now, all of these costs are disproportionately falling on the poor. And that's another very important reason why we need to tackle these issues. Because it's not only about average economic growth, it's also about inclusion. And poor are more exposed, generally more exposed to weather shocks because they already live in more environmentally degraded areas. They already work in agriculture, smallholder farmers, or work outside in construction. Women are, especially in rural areas, are traditionally responsible for food production of fuel and water, so they are exposed to climatic shocks a lot. Poor are also less prepared, again, because they rely less on irrigation, but more on rain-fed agriculture, or they live in lower quality housing, which is more exposed to natural disasters. They also have less access to saving instruments, so financial buffers. They have access to healthcare, so they suffer a larger marginal impact of climate change, and they have less scope to adapt. Again, because they have less access to finance their climate solutions, for example, and they often lack education, lack awareness about climate risks, and lack instruments to participate in political decision making, to have their voice heard and to have their needs addressed. But looking at the global perspective, what we can see is that, and in a more longer run, we can see that business as usual simply cannot continue. There are many ways many unpredictable ways in which climate change can affect our lives and disrupt them. And just one example is a recent study which estimates temperature increases in different regions in the world by 2070. The black regions on this map show regions, territories in the world where the current mean average temperature, annual temperature, is over 29 degrees Celsius. As you can see, these regions so far are located mostly in the Sahara Desert, in the very sparsely populated areas. But then the gray shaded areas are the other regions where the mean average temperature will be 29 degrees Celsius and over by 2070. So what this means is that in several decades, over 3 billion people, mostly in developing countries, will live in areas that are hotter than the hottest risk of irreversible catastrophic changes to. So it's important to start early. Now, where do emissions come from? Look at the African continent, the largest source of emissions, development need, security, or capacity for solar and wind is more decentralized. The infrastructure cost in such cities is per capita is smaller, and climatic changes like desertification or sea level rise. We need wise water management. Nowadays, over 3 billion of people lack access to reliable and safe water use, remanufacturing, and of material, aligning finance with climate objectives. It means managing financial stability to adjust for climate risks, for transition risks, and it's important to mobilize of policy impact on prosperity for us. And so it's important to have mitigating measures. And again, Sub-Saharan Africa offers many nice examples how it can be done. For example, Zambia's community markets livelihood and conservation. Reforming water and agricultural subsidies, again, this is very important for Sub-Saharan Africa. Moving to more sustainable practices is very important. Practices like agroforestry, agrobiodiversity, precision farming, efficient water use. Again, this has to be done case by case. There have to be consultations with stakeholders. But there is more and more evidence that these kind of practices provide resilience, sustainability, and no loss to productivity. And then finally, acceleration of investment into sustainable and resilient infrastructure is very important. And in many cases, it's probably policies should go beyond carbon tax because there are multiple different externalities. Elevated risk perception by private investors because it's all, we're talking about new business models, new technologies, new solutions, and it's very often hard for them to take off. So public investment is an important enabler, and we get more and more evidence. This additional benefit of it is that the green multipliers, so multipliers from investment into conservation, into renewable energy sources are large, and sometimes actually larger than conventional multipliers. And that's important during the recovery from a crisis like we have today. Now, to accelerate investment, it's important to manage financial stability. So macro and microprudential policies to manage climate risks, to discourage banks and other financial institutions to hold brown assets or unsustainable assets on their books. And then mobilizing resources for investment. How do we do it? Especially in times when many countries have already large debt, and they already have needs to recover from a crisis. And the first thing is to tap a huge pool of private investments, domestic and foreign, using incentives, smart incentives, and de-risking strategies like offering feed-in tariffs for electricity suppliers, like offering to absorb a small portion of first loss of a business project if it happens, and so on. And it is very important to, again, tap international climate finance, using instruments like green bonds, cooperation with development banks, international financial institutions, using instruments like debt for nature swaps, which basically reduce countries' debt in exchange for local environmental conservation policies, and instruments like blended finance, where part of the project is financed by government, part is financed by international financial institutions, and usually a much larger part is financed by private institutions. Just an example of project like that is again from Sub-Saharan Africa, is Lake Turkana wind power plant in Kenya, which is an $800 million investment, largely private. It's fully private investment with small incentives from international partners, European Commission, African Development Fund, and Kenyan government, which basically it was a partial risk guarantee. First was capital and feed-in tariff offered by Kenyan government. And so as a result, you have 800 million investment, one of the largest investments, foreign direct investments in the continent, which provides 15% of total country's electricity in a sustainable way. It provides hundreds of jobs, and it provides investment, roads, electricity supply in a region which is very remote. And the last point I want to make is, again, we should not underestimate, and we should embrace technological progress. We've seen tremendous progress in solar and wind over the last 10 years. The new capacity installments have been much larger than even the most optimistic forecasts. This is good news. The technology is working. We have more and more evidence of that. There's also bad news because we see that private markets, policymakers, they consistently underestimate the potential of this technology. And so we need to do more on that. And innovation is not something that is done in advanced economies and then adopted by other countries and so on. We actually need local solutions. We need solutions that are adapted to local circumstances. And luckily, we have many champions in the sub-Saharan Africa, in African continent. Just to name two examples, Nzambi Mate from Kenya, who makes bricks out of plastic, which turn out to be a very nice, robust construction material, or William Kankwamba from Malawi, who made wind-powered irrigation pump out of old bicycle spare parts. So these kind of innovations are very important for local climate solutions, and the governments need to support these champions and to think of ways to for wider adoption of these solutions. So, in the words of in the letter to the future, which was carved on the this was the first Icelandic glacier that was declared extinct. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done, and only you know if we did it. So now do we have some time for questions?
Absolutely, Maxime. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very comprehensive, very clear. We have a lot of action in the chat with many questions. Let me go through some of them. We won't have, unfortunately, time to discuss them all. We received, I guess, more than 50 questions.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I will go through a few of them. If you could keep your answers as short as possible, it would be much appreciated, so we can cover more questions. So here is one of them. It's from Julius Brett from the Central Bank of Kenya. So he's citing a recent study, is a 2021 study by Kripa and co-authors that found that food systems are responsible for more than a third of greenhouse gas emissions. And yet, agriculture sector accounts for approximately 1/3 of GDP in most sub-Saharan African countries. So his question essentially is, in the light of these findings, the climate change objective could be viewed as a competing objective with the need to feed current and feed future generations. How should we design climate change policies and interventions in sub-Saharan Africa while at the same time pursuing sustainable agriculture? So I guess he's asking about the trade-off.
Yeah, very important question, and very hard to answer in a few seconds. But certainly, I don't think there is a conflict. I think there is a space for smart policies. For sure, smart reforms of agricultural subsidies, which would enable both food security, growth of productivity, and sustainability, and actually resilience. we have, for example, research by Food and Land Use Coalition. If you are more interested in that, you can check this out. So research by this coalition, it's a coalition of many research institutes which work on this program, or work on smart and sustainable agricultural practices. It shows that it is possible, that there is actually no conflict, even at the global level, and in particular in sub-Saharan Africa. And again, let me give you an example, which I meant to go through in the presentation, but for the lack of time, I didn't. A Great Green Wall in the Sahel region, and actually it's a multi-country project at the south of Sahara Desert, which involves large-scale tree planting schemes, education for using help of smallholder farmers there, large education for these farmers to use agroforestry in their farming practices, animal farming and plant farming. So basically growing plants and animals near the trees. That is an example which provides livelihoods, provides jobs. It's an investment for governments with large multipliers for economy, for recovery. At the same time, it provides livelihood, it provides more productive agriculture, and it provides more resilient economies there, because the trees are instrumental to stop desertification in that region, for example. And it provides global benefit because trees are carbon sinks, and they provide shelter for wildlife. So this is an example, but these kind of examples are country specific. But overall, these projects, these smart practices, can remove the conflict between food security and sustainability, and actually lead to synergies between the two.
Thank you very much, Maxime. We'll go to another. I think is a quick question that you can address. Is a question from Aboubakri Diallo. He's asking essentially, why did you make a difference between climate change and environmental issues? I think these two issues can't be apart from one another. Is there a meaningful difference between climate change and environmental issue?
I fully agree. I think these are all linked. I mean, we can think of various reasons, but for sure, climate change and other environmental issues are tightly linked, either caused by each other or caused by unsustainable policies which drive all of them. So it is really important to tackle them together, indeed. So thanks for reiteration of this point. Yes.
And maybe a final question for you. So this is from the Kenya, James Ocheng from the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. He's asking, how do we ensure that the green transition is inclusive between regions or countries and within a country? Because as it seems, some countries are way ahead in the transition process. So how can we ensure inclusiveness?
Well, two points. First, I think, and I provided many examples, but of course, you are, by the way, feel free to write me about any sources or literatures for the examples that I've used here. I provide many examples where climate solutions actually lead to more inclusive models of economic growth, and that is a very important component. It's very important to understand. And the other part, of course, is that some policies have to be deliberately inclusive, like carbon taxes. You need to have mitigating measures for the poor. Conservation can lead to some land conflicts, so you need to have mitigating measures for those who may suffer from that. So you need to think of both of that. That's the first thing. The other thing, yes, there are countries, there are many advanced economies which are which are investing a lot and which are progressing on transition faster. And then, here in African continent, in many developing countries, we have development needs. We don't want, we want to eliminate extreme poverty. Nobody says that the country has to stay at this level of development. We want economic development to happen. It is making this challenge, making this more challenging, addressing all of these goals. But again, I think there are many synergies in the climate solution. And an important point is international climate finance. And again, it's a cornerstone of Paris Agreement. For example, advanced economies have pledged at least $100 billion per year to mitigation and adaptation climate needs in developing countries. And it's important to work on how to use these funds, how to use this funding more efficiently. And I've mentioned a couple of instruments that can be used: blended finance, engaging with development banks, multinational development banks, underwriting green bonds, debt for nature swaps, and so on. So that should help with transition that is more inclusive at the cross-country level.
Thanks, Maxime. Before we go for a break, let me just inform our friends who are watching us on social media that we are going to only stream live this session. The other sessions, if you want to continue to attend to watch this and follow these discussions here with us, please register on the link that is being displayed on your screen on social media, so that you can continue watching the full session on the Zoom platform. So register on that link and you will be able to watch the full webinar. Thank you very much. And Maxime, if I can, I should ask a final question for you. It's from Mr. Abaga Ngema Samuel from Gabon. So he asks in French. So the carbon tax is a very important aspect or element for a green economy. In the case of countries located below equator, like Gabon, how can we go about applying a carbon tax? So I guess he's referring to tropical countries like Gabon.
Well, I'm sure that this will be mentioned in this webinar going forward, and certainly I really advise countries to tap the expertise of, especially at the IMF. We have many experts on implementing this tax, and it's as I've mentioned, if it's properly designed, if we have mitigating measures for the poor, for affected businesses, it is actually growth friendly. It is very efficient even for revenue collection, and it is good for sustainability. So it's one of the good taxes in a sense to collect, to raise revenue, and which means I think it is appropriate for countries with full level of development, and it is not hard to administer, as many countries already have excise taxes for example for gasoline. So the system, the administration is very similar, but again the general advice to go forward is ask your IMF country team. They will be able to provide you advice and technical assistance on how exactly to implement it and how to make it more politically acceptable. and more inclusive.
Thanks again, Maxime. Thank you very much for your presentation and for answering these questions. And you make a good point. Many of these questions that are being asked, and then unfortunately I could not pass it on to Maxime. I will pass it on to him by writing. But also many of these questions that relate to IMF policies and also some of specific on carbon pricing and other issues will be discussed as we go forward in this webinar, and then hopefully we can tackle them again in the next sessions. Again, thanks, Maxime. This was great, and now I will kindly ask my colleagues at ATI to put the clock for a short break of 10 minutes. The discussions were very interesting. I didn't want to cut it short. So we have a 10 minutes break before we start the next panel. Thank you very much, Maxime and Diksha. Please put the clock for us.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.